Hello, fellow Americans. Okay. 3, 2, 1. Good evening, fellow Americans. We have all had to make a very important decision today. A decision that will change a nation forever. And that decision was, what comic books were you, citizen, going to buy on November 7th, 2012? Now, let me tell you, this was not an easy decision. There are people in the blue corner, the DC corner. There are people in the red corner, Marvel people. And in order for our great country to thrive, the fact of the matter is, it's important not to be too biased, to be too blue or too red. It's important to compromise. And in hopes of uniting the country, I've decided to buy both DC books and one Marvel book this week. It's not a Spider-Man book, it's not a Daredevil book, and yet somehow there's a Marvel book in my stack today. And I did it for the good of the nation. Now, what book was that, you may ask? Well, you'll have to wait, because it turns out it was Pick of the Week. Okay, guys, so here we go. Minutia Minute comic book reviews, kicking it off for the books coming out November 7th, 2012. Post-election, time to unwind, and let's just talk comics for a change. So, I got 5 books this week. Normally, I would have 5 books also, but one of the DC books that I was going to get actually didn't ship to my comic book shop. There was some kind of problem with Diamond, I think. So I decided to order that book online rather than wait till next week, because I have some free gift card money online that I'm going to use. And as a result, I decided to pop this other mystery Marvel book into the mix, and I was glad I did. But we'll get to that at the end of the video, because like I said, Marvel did get Pick of the Week this week. So, what's at the bottom of the pile? Not bad books by any means, but I am just not feeling these books anymore. And it's a tie between Swamp Thing and, of course, Animal Man. Now, why am I not feeling these books? You know, I was so excited 6 months ago about getting to Rot World. And then they slowly started kind of letting the steam out because they were just drifting along. And then finally Rot World hit, and now that it's here, I'm just not digging it. Both of these books kind of had faults for kind of different reasons, so I should probably talk about them separately. But, you know, the biggest thing that's kind of a turnoff for these is when I buy both of these books, I now officially know that I'm going to be reading the same book twice over with different characters. Last time, it was all about, you know, each of our avatars finding their little haven of the red or haven of the green, and finding out about the deaths of their families and everything, blah, 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 blah. That was kind of okay, but now they have the same story again, and that is that they are each going to go off and try and face Anton Arcane by walking into an obvious trap. And that's really annoying, because that was how they got to Rot World in the first place, was falling for what seems like a really, really obvious, really, really obnoxious trap that they shouldn't have fallen into. Well, now they're going to make that exact same mistake again, literally minutes after they just made that mistake. I mean, it's been a year in DC continuity, but it's only been seconds for Animal Man and Swamp Thing, yet still they're pretty freaking stupid. So that element of that really blew it for me on both of these books. I just found myself rolling my eyes a lot. However, there are good things to talk about as well. So let's kick it off here with Swamp Thing specifically. This wasn't an all-bad book. We've got Yannick Paquette on artwork, I think through the whole thing, which is the first time that's happened in quite a while, which was nice. We do get a little bit more of an expansion of kind of what the green world looks like, and we do find out that the stuff that happened in the annual, excuse me, I was almost going to say animal, as an Animal Man, the annual for Swamp Thing is going to pay off on some level here, because you find out that Abigail Arcane, spoilers, is not dead. At least not necessarily. Now, this is where the book kind of gets a little bit confusing, because you have basically what happened to Abigail Arcane immediately after the airplane blew up, sort of at the end of the last issue, but it took place a year before in DC continuity, yada, 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 you know, that whole complicated thing. We get to find out what happens to her. And some of that happens in voiceover as we're dealing with Swamp Thing stuff. And so that made kind of the way this story is told really confusing, because since you have voiceover during modern times for something that was happening in the past, it kind of like maybe confused as to when exactly Abigail Arcane was going through, was what she was going to, but I am pretty sure that what we see of her in this book is actually from the past, and we find her going back to Transylvania, a la Swamp Thing, which we saw in the annual. So I'm wondering how this is going to play in. I wonder if maybe that mystery plant that made everybody forget, I wonder if that's going to become some kind of Deus Ex Machina down the road, and it's not just an avenue for making Swamp Thing randomly forget this huge event that happened early in life because nobody knew about it until now, or something like that. It's really tough to say where this is headed right now. Other than the fact that, as I said, Swamp Thing's basically like, well, I'm going to go get her, and I don't care what the consequences are. And, oh yeah, I'm going to do exactly the same retarded thing that I did last time, which is take the battle to them when I'm at my weakest point. So anyway, there you have it. One of the really fun things about this... Oh no, wait, that's Animal Man. So we'll kick it off next with Animal Man number 14. Now, the thing that was fun about this book was in the process of Animal Man kind of deciding that he had to go off. In his case, he's got to go get Maxine, because obviously his wife is already turned to the rot. His mother-in-law is already turned to the rot. Maxine is the only semblance of something left over. And again, she's also been captured by Anton Arcane, and I'm guessing that she's going to be in this Transylvania location also. But we don't get that far in this. In this, we see her meet up with another individual of the Arcane family. I don't want to spoil this, but I may have just done it just by saying that, but it was pretty exciting because one of the most riveting parts of the first, so the middle, issues like 4 through 8 or so of Swamp Thing, a big part of those issues is back in this, and it's pretty scary. Actually, also back in Swamp Thing. It's so hard to talk about these books separately, and yet here I am trying to. Anyway, the thing that's exciting about this book for me was, and I don't know if anyone else noticed that, maybe this wasn't even on purpose, but I'll bet you anything that it was. The Green Haven is attacked by the Rot again in this issue, but the people that they send after them is basically every character that Rob Liefeld has had anything to do with in the New 52. Literally, we've got Grifter, Deathstroke, Hawk and Dove, and Hawkman, I want to say. So, we had Hawkman in last issue for sure. I think maybe in this issue as well. And so you have this, and like all the good guys are all the people basically from Justice League Dark. And so it's kind of like Jeff Lemire's kind of like, look at all these horrible undead things that Rob Liefeld has created for the DC universe. And here's all of my awesome creations basically kicking ass and taking names against all of these Liefeld blunders. So that element of this issue was kind of fun. It was very subtextual. It wasn't played up at all, but it was something that I kind of noticed. Otherwise, again, story-wise, I mean, it's the same thing we've been going on with in Swamp Thing, except in Animal Man form. So he's going to take the battle to the Rot, in his case, to find Maxine. The question is, what trap is he going to run into, and how exactly the same is it going to be to the trap that Swamp Thing runs into? That's pretty much all I have to say about these books. Again, I mean, these aren't bad books. They're fun. The stakes are high, but there's just not something clicking about them. And I honestly think it's because I read one, I read the next one, and I just feel like everything's kind of said and done. And maybe partly that's because you know that this future, as good of a job as they've done drawing us into this future, now that it's here, you know that it's not here to stay. So I don't know, we'll see. I, like many of you out there, I'm curious to know what's going to happen to these titles after Rot World, and if they're basically, this is a one and done for them, and then our wonderful creators are going to be on to other things, or if we're going to get to see what they have to say about these characters after Rot World is done. And that's something I'm really more interested in than anything at this point. All right, sort of the middle book out of the 5 books that I got, however, again, not a bad book at all, was Earth 2 number 6. And this was a pretty fun issue. There's only one big misstep in it, which came kind of at the end. But here we basically get the big wrap-up with Solomon Grundy. And the thing that makes this fantastic is it has a wonderful Golden or Silver Age kind of feel to the way the logic of this world works. The way they finally defeat Solomon Grundy at the end is absolutely classic, brilliant stuff. And it's totally something you would see in like a Crisis on Multiple Earths kind of a story, some kind of Gardner Fox madness. You know, I mean, it's only more believable because Gardner Fox would kind of go out on a limb, but at the same time, like there was this element of like, we'll make this make sense in some kind of logical way, even though the things we're dealing with are at heart kind of completely illogical. For example, a man who has green power that can build constructs with his mind. You know, like that in and of itself is completely nonsensical. And yet you can defeat a bad guy using those powers, but also just sort of like reasonable Encyclopedia Brown deductive kind of ways as well. So anyway, that made this book a lot of fun. We do have Terry Sloan in this again. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen with him. I wasn't quite sure what direction they were going to take him when he popped up back in like issue 2, because obviously he is the original Mr. Terrific. And I'm still not quite clear what direction his character is going. I feel like I don't want to see him just turn into kind of like Lex Luthor or something. We'll have to wait and see. But all in all, this was a very enjoyable read. Wonderful, very fitting art by Nicola Scott, and very golden age, silver age writing by James Robinson, making this. I think, and I said last time, I think, this reads like an old comic in the sense that there's lots of dialogue, and yet there's still a sense of action, but at the same time, there's still something to read. It's not all splash pages. And in this, it's not just the way it's written, but like the actual plot devices of the story that feel golden age. So, anyway, great stuff. The only thing about this book that brought it down a little bit was, again, the ending, and I didn't really specify what happened. I'm going to spoil it. It's not much of a spoiler, really, but basically what happens is, when they finally defeat everyone, Green Lantern basically says, well, I'm so powerful, I don't need anyone else. You guys go home, I'll deal with everything myself. It seemed like a very convenient way to keep our main characters kind of at odds and still build the team a little bit more down the road, which I think is going to be good for character development, but at the same time, there was this element of, like, why would he do that? Like, it just seemed kind of out of character. I mean, he seems like a relatively humble individual. He seems like someone who's, conscientious of other people, and he's just kind of like, well, I'm all powerful, leave me alone, I'm going away. That was the only thing that kind of brought this down. But all in all, though, very good read. Earth 2 is a book I always look forward to. It makes week 1 of any given month very, very exciting indeed. All right. Runner-up to pick of the week, last DC book I got. It was a very DC-heavy week. This particular issue is a definite upset from the norm. That is Green Lantern number 14. Not pick of the week, but darn close. Why is this book good? Well, we have got some story happenings going on, and not just little things. I mean, this story is really starting to build very, very successfully. I opened this book, and I was so close to not even buying it. I'm just so done with some of Jeff Johns' stuff recently. And, if you read Justice League issue 1, and then read Justice League issue 2, you know that Jeff Johns seems to want to introduce all of the new characters, presuming that, Batman, Superman, and Green Lantern were new characters at the beginning of the New 52. But he basically wants to introduce all these people by having them fight. And so you have this beat at the end of issue 13, where exactly the same thing happens at the end of Justice League 1, which is basically one hero runs into another hero, and it's like, well, we're going to fight now. And they did a phenomenal job of paying that off in this issue. I was expecting to open it up and have it be basically like fighting, more fighting, and then boredom on my part, because it was going to be brainless. Instead, you have some wonderful quippy lines between Batman and Green Lantern, this new Green Lantern, that were kind of reminiscent of that first issue of Justice League, actually, because that was a pretty fun moment as well. But this wonderful sort of quirky tension that Jeff Johns has kind of developed for those guys comes out right at the beginning of this when he meets with the Justice League. And there's basically a moment where it's like, we are not going to have that obnoxious fight sequence. Now, ultimately it happens anyway, but there's a beat in this at the beginning that throws you off and makes you kind of pay a little bit more attention, and then when it does get to the fight, it's a lot more interesting, and it really makes Jeff Johns shine in terms of the fact that he really does know how to write Green Lanterns well, and one of the ways you write Green Lanterns well is find new and interesting creative ways to use the rings. He does that in this issue and made it not just a holds down, no holds barred brawl. It made it just, a bit more of an interesting sort of chase kind of an incident. And it was just, all in all, it was just a lot more interesting to read. In addition to that, it wasn't the only thing that happened in this book. As we continue forward, we get a little bit more into the Third Army, and we finally get to see what happened with Hal and Sinestro. So all in all, this book was a very entertaining read, and I would have been okay with giving this book Pick of the Week if it wasn't for the book that I'm about to review for you guys. And that book is Deadpool #1 from Marvel Now. Wow. So I wanted to get something non-DC this week. I looked at lots of independent books. I had about 3 or 4 in my hands, like, okay, pick one. And I ended up going with the Marvel one against my better judgment. I did that because it was $2.99, and I want to encourage Marvel to do $2.99 things. In addition, I've never read Deadpool before, and Agent 42Q won't shut up about him, so I want to know what he's talking about. That said, though, even as I was buying it, I was automatically regretting it until I actually opened it up and started reading, because this book, as I said, Pick of the Week, it was phenomenal. I'm not going to get too much into the artwork. I think the cover says a lot. You get kind of the style. It's not really the same as the artwork that's inside, but nevertheless, like, Tony Moore does a great job with artwork in this, and that's really all I'm going to say. What I do want to talk about is the fact that, this is a good #1. I've never read a single issue of Deadpool before. I know who he is. I know what he can do. But this does a great job of introducing who he is, what he's like as a person. It does a great job of explaining his powers in an organic way that wasn't, for me, like, as a reader, it's like, that that's what they're doing, but at the same time, it wasn't, like, dunderheaded. And on top of that, delivering a really great eccentric story that is amazingly topical, given that the way the election went last night. And honestly, I mean, whichever direction the election went, unless Republicans had won both the Senate and won the presidency, this book wouldn't have been as in touch, I guess, with what happened. But I mean, that was pretty unlikely. I think most people were expecting at least Democrats to hold the Senate, if not, have Barack Obama be reelected. But this book basically is all about, subtextually, both about and also sort of spitting in the face of the issue of government being able to cooperate and get something done. Hence the beginning of this video. You have basically the founding fathers, or not even just the founding fathers, but significant people in American history coming back from the dead and saying, well, we can make the country right, and what they're going to do is kill everyone and destroy it. And so there's this great subtext of, like, our sort of Americans looking back at, like, the golden age of America and sort of maybe putting that into a little bit of perspective in this really backhanded way, but also the idea that, no politicians have ever really been able to work together, and kind of, taking that concept and, again, kind of spitting it in your face in this really over-the-top way. I mean, the fact that this book came out literally the morning after the election, and I watched the whole thing. Like, I'm one of those people that I watch the map minute to minute. I mean, the second Obama won Pennsylvania, I was like, okay, he's probably going to win. Then he won New Hampshire, and even though there was only like 4 votes, that kind of told you, like, okay, Obama has it. You could have stopped watching after he got New Hampshire, really. But I still watched the whole thing until 2 in the morning when he actually got on and gave a speech. So I'm one of those people, I'm very invested in just watching those things. And so I literally did that all night, crashed, got up, went out, bought this book, and it was the first book I read. So, like, talk about a timely comic book. For a medium that likes to be socially relevant, you don't get much more socially relevant than Deadpool #1. Another reason I picked this book up that was definitely something that paid off is this is written by Brian Posehn. Posehn? I think it's Posehn. For those of you who don't know who he is a stand-up comic. He's not quite mainstream celebrity, but he's kind of like cult following kind of level. He was on the Sarah Silverman show, which I didn't really watch. He's basically the comic that you see once in a while that looks an awful lot like Scott Bromstar. I guess is the only way I can think to describe him. But he's a pretty funny comedian. He's got definitely a sensibility that fits with someone who would write a comic book, and I think that his humor, I feel like, comes out in this, and it really seems to fit Deadpool well. And again, this is someone framing this from someone who's never read Deadpool before. It fit at least this book very well. I think the person with him, which is Jerry Dugan, I want to say, Jerry Duggan. I'm guessing he's more the comic book aspect of this, and Brian Posehn is sort of the guy who's like, hey, add this word balloon, or add this, something else, or, he's not really breaking the comic down. I think he's giving us the broad strokes and giving us all the great one-liners and, like, cheesy jokes that you get in this book. I feel like Brian Posehn, after reading this, could actually almost write a good Spider-Man story, because Deadpool is almost telling as nerdy jokes as Spider-Man does, except it's in much more gruesome situations. So I feel like if you eliminated the gruesome situations, Brian Posehn could actually do a good Spider-Man. So maybe that's something that'll come down the road. But anyway, for the meantime, Deadpool #1, fantastic read, absolutely recommend it. Marvel now! Alright, so that's everything I got this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm actually recording this in my girlfriend's apartment right now because I'm avoiding Beardy. So there you go. Hope everybody has a great comic book reading experience this week, and I'll talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.